we don't know yet, because it could happen in 15, 20 years' time. But I'm quite sure it won't happen in the next 5 years, that the metaverse is the natural and dominant place we go to learn. That was the wish and the hope of people like Mark Zuckerberg and others. And indeed, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta all put a lot of money in the case in particular of Meta.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Descomplica T&D, Simplify L&D, the most complete learning and development podcast in Brazil and also in countries that have Portuguese as their mother language. My name is Michel Mussolini, and I would like to thank each and every single one of you that come back every week to listen, to reflect, and evolve as a professional, as a human being. It has been a fantastic journey in the past 6 months of our weekly podcast, and I have been having the opportunity to discover some great people and also to meet again several folks that have been part of my professional journey and my professional evolvement. Today, we will perform our episode in English because we have a special and international guest, and I'm so excited for today's podcast. We have met in 2018 when we shared the presentation at Learning 2018 conference in Orlando, and we talked together about learning around the globe. He's Bachelor of Arts, Politics, Philosophy, and Economics by University of Oxford and has an honorary doctorate of Workplace Learning and Development by Middlesex University. During his journey as a professional, he had several challenges. He worked as Sales and Marketing Director of Iris Education. He acted as Managing Director of SkillServer, and for more than 15 years have been working as an independent consultant for L&D, being the chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute and also editor of the Inside Learning Technologies magazine. Last but not least, he is the chairperson of the Learning Technologies Conference for the past 23 years. Learning Technologies in Europe is the largest conference dedicated to workplace learning. Influential organizer, writer, researcher in the field of adult learning, skills and technology, in 2007 he received the Colin Corder Award for service to training. Nowadays, he focuses on bringing together people and ideas and creating space for useful conversations in learning to occur through organizing events and research and writing. So here we are to talk about learning with one and only Donald Taylor. Welcome, Donald, to our show. Thanks for being here, man.
Really good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Okay, so recently there was a research from Insight 222 with more than 100 global organizations, and they released an article presenting the 12 HR trends for 2023. And the two new trends that appeared after the pandemic were necessity to empower managers, employees, and leaders with data, and also the necessity to redesign the work to be a more productive and competitive workplace. The companies should rethink how they work and how they are designed to execute their work. So, during the past years, did we have a redesign also on the training methodologies, best practices, processes? How can you share with us your knowledge about this movement pre and post pandemic?
It's a great question. And I think since the pandemic, and over the pandemic, two things have happened. One is, yes, there's been a huge change in the way learning and development does what it does. But that change, I think, has been tactical and not strategic. So we've changed what we do every day quite a lot, but the rationale behind it hasn't changed. Let me explain what I mean. When we went into the pandemic and we began lockdown, we couldn't mix with people, it was a huge change for learning and development people, well, for everybody. So in January 2020, roughly about 50% of training delivery was done face-to-face and 50% online. And that had taken probably about 20 years, from January 2000 to January 2020. And by April of 2020, suddenly 100% of training delivery was taking place online, or not at all. So there was a huge shift very quickly. The learning and development profession did a great job changing what it did to be able to deliver online. And we're never going back to the position where it's 50% of stuff is done face-to-face. There's a whole new appreciation of the value of doing stuff online. But what didn't change was as I say, the rationale of what we're doing. Still, learning and development is concerned largely with the creation and delivery of material, of content, and much less concerned with what I think is the goal of learning and development, which is to help individuals and organizations reach their potential in a range of ways. And that can be through learning from content, but it should also be from learning from each other and other ways of learning and other ways of improving performance, which we haven't changed. So the short answer to your question is we changed, but we didn't change enough of the right things. There we are.
I agree with you. Here in Brazil, what we see in the majority of the companies is that the learning and development folks, they are focused, as you said, on providing material only. It's like a checkbox, you know, I delivered that content, everybody did it, and we have this success rate and so on. But no one is looking for the impact of that training in people's results. Here, it's still a huge gap. We have still a huge gap on correlating results to training efforts. And another thing that calls my attention, and whenever I have opportunity to speak with the company's CEOs, presidents, and learning and development directors, HR directors, is that we need to take in consideration as well the generation, because generations of people learn differently. Here in Brazil, around 65% of the workforce is millennials. And millennials, they don't learn as we learn, as I learn, as you learn. For me, I can sit down in a meeting room and learn for hours, someone speaking using the whiteboard and so on. But the millennials, they don't learn that way, and the courses, the materials that are offered are not so engaging. They are like PowerPoints, automatized, using as a SCORM and running the LMS. Do you see this tendency and this situation also in UK and in Europe?
There's a lot of talk about generational differences between people and how people learn in different ways. I would say it's more subtle than that, that because the younger generation has been exposed to a wide range of things, they are more open to them. And they're more used to doing things in different ways. Also, and I think this is important, I think the younger generation, Gen Z, millennials, whatever, I think they're more demanding. I think they have grown up in a world where you expect things to happen. When I was a kid growing up, you had a cereal packet, and on the back of the cereal packet, it said, if you collect 3 tokens from the cereals, you put them in an envelope, you send them to this address, then you will get back a toy of some sort, right? And it always said, allow 28 days for delivery. I have to say, the idea that you would collect these tokens from the cereal packets and then wait, well, put it in a letter and then wait 28 days, it wouldn't happen today. And I think that expectation of things being more immediate is very real with people. But at the same time, I think it's also true that young people are willing, if they see a long-term objective, to work hard at not just things that are immediate, like TikTok and so on, which, by the way, is a very valuable way of learning, but they're also prepared to work in traditional ways. So I was talking with my son last night about his desire to learn better French, and he's laid out a whole program of doing it that involves a combination of short-term activities, like tools that you can access on the internet, but also longer-term things, like working with a tutor, getting a course, and so on. So I don't think it's so much that younger people are unable to learn in certain ways. I think it's more that they are more demanding, and when they want to learn, they want to make it happen fast, and they know that there's a range of things they can use in order to learn fast. And we do see that, I think, everywhere, certainly in UK and Europe. But of course, Brazil is a fascinating country because it has such a large young population. And I think that's a really interesting thing for the future. And I don't have that population to look at.
I agree with you when you say that they are very demanding. And I would add to that the micro-learnings are something that companies here and worldwide, if you have a younger generation of workforce, as we do here, companies should be looking at, because the way they as I'm seeing, okay, the way they process the information is faster than we do, the X generation does, and they seem to retain more knowledge when they have these pills of learning, small pills of learning. When you have extensive formal courses, like a pre-requirement course to start a new job, they engage themselves more when you split the journey in steps, in micro steps. And when you provide also opportunity for them to interact during the learning process, not only as a passive learner, but also as an active learner, and sharing their what they have learned and sharing their opinion. So this helps a lot the learning process and the engaging process of these generations. Now, we have been talking about challenges of L&D areas during the past years, and you have just released survey. I read it and I found a great source of data. What can you share with us that was different, that was new on your survey? So tell us a little bit more about the survey and what did you find out in 2023 results, please.
The survey this year, which is the 10th year of doing it, went out to about 4,000 people in 100 countries. It was very, very interesting for lots of reasons, but there's one particular reason which was very surprising, which is the huge change in how people feel about AI, artificial intelligence. The survey asks 3 questions. There's only one obligatory question, so it's a very quick survey to do. And that obligatory question is, what do you think will be hot in workplace learning and development next year? And last year, artificial intelligence was on its way down, going down during the course of the survey. They had been excited about it 3 or 4 years ago. And now it was something which they'd heard about, but they weren't really excited about. This year, it exploded back up again in the survey. But of course, when I say exploded, it jumped up 4.5% up the table from a position of 12 last year to number 2 this year, which is a huge change. And it's something that's never happened before. We've never had that big a change in positions or that big a change in the number of votes. So it's significant, there's no question. It wasn't uniform. There were different places where some people were much more excited about artificial intelligence and some places where they were much less excited about it. So in Israel and Turkey, for example, where there's strong investment in, particularly in Israel, in artificial intelligence, it was a big jump. In Brazil, much less so. In Ireland, and I still don't know why, but in the Republic of Ireland, there was no change at all in the vote. People were much less interested in Ireland than anywhere else in the world. In Brazil, I think the vote went to 9.3%, something like that. And it was pretty much, it definitely one of the countries that was much less interested in artificial intelligence than elsewhere. Sorry, no, it was 5.5% in Brazil, much less interested than elsewhere. So there are definitely places in the world where people are more and less excited about it. Now, what happened to make some people in the world so excited about it? It was the release of Chat GPT, which came out 1 week, to the English-speaking world anyway, came out 1 week before the survey was launched, and that had a big effect. But it's interesting that it wasn't just artificial intelligence that was affected by this. There was also a rise in people interested in skills-based talent management, which means understanding the skills you have in your organization and the people and how the people match the jobs with their skills. There was also the question of the 4th place option, which was learning analytics, which also rose up this year. That, like artificial intelligence, had been on the way down. And it's very unusual when things start going down in people's estimation, when they stop being excited about it. It's unusual to have them coming back up. So it's something more than just the business of artificial intelligence lifting up the vote. A number of things lifted their vote. And what lost votes this year is very interesting. The thing that lost votes is collaborative and social learning, which was the option, which was the thing that had gained votes during the course of the pandemic. So it was almost like during the pandemic, we wanted to be closer to people. We wanted to feel that we were being engaged with people. After the pandemic and after the lockdowns, it's almost like people have gone back to where we were in 2020, which is to say, we're really excited about the prospect of data and analytics and so on. I should say that in Brazil, collaborative and social learning remains, as it always has done, the number one option. There's a marked, very big difference between Brazil and the rest of the world, particularly between South America and North America, in what they think about collaborative and social learning. So it remains a strong option in Brazil. So that was a very long answer, Michelle, to your question.
I saw the results, and here one thing that calls my attention is the artificial intelligence, because last week I've been to US attending 1 week meetings in Washington, New York, and Boston, where a delegation of Brazil, composed by 24 people, different industries, with our entity that represents the industries here in Brazil, the CNI. We talked with a lot of companies and a lot of U.S. government departments, and all of them talked about artificial intelligence. All of them, the importance, the tendency, the will of people to understand more. And on the other hand, Donald, as I'm seeing here in Brazil, and maybe it's something, a characteristic that is specific here for us, we understand the importance, but we don't trade off artificial intelligence with the importance of learning with each other. Because when you learn with each other, when you learn in a social way, in a collaborative way, it makes you think more, it makes you reflect more, it makes you prepare your brain to provide answers in a personal way, instead of waiting for some magic software tell you what's the correct answer. And I saw in US that the will to have this providing us answers in a quickly way, in a fast way. And so the defense to that point of view is that we will spend our time analyzing the data to make clever decisions. But when you let a computer analyze the data for you, it's very I think it's very concerning to the quality of the output. Do you believe that the more developed countries, they have these how can I say this, distrust, they have more trust in computer science and data than the undeveloped countries? Or do you believe that this is like a lazy, if I can say that, a lazy way of trying to live your lives and delegate to the computer things that you should be doing and analyzing and reflecting to perform your job?
Really good question. I don't think it's a matter of the economic development of a country. I think it's more to do with the culture of a country and how traditionally it has been individualistic or how it has been collaborative and social. And if we look at the work of people like Gerd Hofstadter and his cultural analysis, we can see that it is possible to say that there are, in South America typically, for example, there's a far greater sense of society and collaboration than there is of the individual. So consistently, year on year, the United States and North America generally puts personalization above collaboration. South America and Brazil in particular puts collaboration above personalization. Now that's a general trend. I also think that reflects that you can see that trend in people's views of artificial intelligence. So if I look at how there are 18 countries in the world responding to the survey where more than 100 people respond. If I look across those, there are a number of countries where that big enthusiasm for artificial intelligence, which was so strong in Israel and in Turkey, is not felt. By the way, that enthusiasm is also seen in France, Germany, and Poland. There are three countries right across Europe from west to east, which have a strong vote for artificial intelligence. But if we look around the edges in Europe, we can see, and they're all economically developed countries, we can see that there are other countries which are less enthusiastic. So Sweden had a much lower vote for AI than some of the other countries, 11.5%, and its vote for collaborative learning, 11.2%, was almost the same. But there are other places where the vote for AI was not strong at all. In the United Kingdom, it was only 8.4%, which is much lower than it was in the US, 10%, or in Germany, France, and Poland. But there are other countries which are less economic. Sorry, let's stick with Europe for the moment. There are other countries where they're economically developed, but they are not excited about artificial intelligence. And of those, Ireland is the most obvious. It had a vote of 4% for AI, but New Zealand as well, 5%. That's a very low vote. And there are other countries which are not very economically developed, like Malaysia, where the vote is also low. That was 4.9%. So I don't think the correlation is between economic development and a liking for AI. I think it's something else that's going on there, a number of other factors. And there's the other factor, of course, is how recently have countries been exposed to Chat GPT in particular, but AI tools generally. I was speaking with the Ukrainian delegation last week. We had a great turnout from the Ukraine, people voting there. And we had a very interesting low vote for AI from Ukraine, 7.7%, much lower than you would have expected given the other European countries, especially Poland. So why was it so low? The reason is that whereas Chat GPT came out in English at the end of November, it only came out in Ukrainian in the second week of February, which was after the survey had finished. So people hadn't been exposed to it so much. So I think there's a combination of how much people have been exposed to AI tools recently and other cultural things to do with what people feel about the use of technology, which are not necessarily related to a country's economic development. That's quite a long answer, but what I'm saying is I think it's a slightly complicated relationship between people and their view of AI, and I don't think it's entirely around economic development.
Now, the results between North and Central America and South America. We can see some interesting information here. We have already talked about the collaborative and social learning, that in South America countries, it's the number one trend, number one thing that they focus on. But and also the artificial intelligence, that on the other hand, North and Central America is the number one thing they are voting as being important. But one thing that called my attention here is the metaverse. You know, even in North and in Central America, the metaverse has a very low percentage of people that voted on this. Last week, as I told you, during this week of meetings in US, I had the opportunity to be in Google, and during the meeting there, they talked a lot about how, in their point of view, in their researchers, the metaverse are not motivating or are not being so well searched by people as they supposed in the beginning of the metaverse tendency. Now they say that nobody's looking so much in metaverse, and here in Brazil, I can tell you that everybody is eager to understand more and looking for metaverse solutions, even though they don't know how to use it in their learning process. Do you believe that metaverse will be someday the main learning solution or area that we use for learning, or this will be another tendency that pops up and suddenly we will disappear?
That's a big question, and for me the answer is we don't know yet, because it could happen in 15, 20 years' time. But I'm quite sure it won't happen in the next 5 years, that the metaverse is the natural and dominant place we go to learn. That was the wish and the hope of people like Mark Zuckerberg and others, and indeed Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta all put a lot of money in the case in particular of Meta, into developing teams, technologies around this. But then, especially in the second half of last year, of 2022, they cut those teams back, and they were cut either in whole or very substantially by Meta, by Google, by Microsoft, by Amazon. Those teams have all been cut back. And I think we're seeing that in the North American vote for the metaverse. People have seen the way those jobs have just been axed, and they see that as an indication that it's not going anywhere soon. It may simply be that feeling hasn't come down to South America because, well, South America doesn't have tens of thousands of people employed there in those fields. And so we're still waiting for that feeling to arrive. It'll be the same thing in Europe. Two things about the metaverse. Firstly, it was a really, really poor vote for the metaverse generally. I think it was 2.6% on the table overall, nobody thought it was interesting internationally. The vote was higher in South America, but it certainly wasn't high. The vote in South America was 3.8%, so not a large vote. The other thing about the metaverse, and why I say I don't think it's going to be the dominant place for doing learning in the next 5 years, is that it's not like a mobile phone. The mobile phone, we carry it with us. It's a very simple thing. We carry it with us, and it's on almost all the time. We're connected almost all the time to be able to relay information verbally or via text or picture with other people. The metaverse, the idea of the metaverse is that it takes that concept and goes one step beyond. But if I could just talk about mobile phones for a second, the mobile phones provide us with connections with each other that are almost persistent and permanent. In other words, we've gone from a position whereby you connected with people when you saw them, or perhaps when you wrote to them, to a position where you are connected with people almost all the time. And that connection is what the mobile phone makes possible. And it does it because it is a really small thing that can go into your pocket and doesn't cost an enormous amount of money. It's not cheap, but it doesn't cost an enormous amount of money. None of these things is true for virtual reality, but virtual reality is fine for a specialist tool for training. But if you're using virtual reality tools to access the metaverse, it is not small, it is not convenient, it is not cheap. It's not as expensive as it was, but it's not cheap. And the most important thing, though, is that when you go through the business of putting your helmet on and stepping into the metaverse, there's nobody there. It's not the permanent, persistent world that the mobile phone offers. If it had something like the mobile phone, or if the mobile phone didn't exist, it would still be exciting. But the alternative to contacting people and learning things and engaging with the world via a helmet and a metaverse experience, the alternative to that is sufficiently rich and low cost and convenient that it makes much more sense not to use the metaverse. So the metaverse has to increase what it offers considerably. You have to be able to do a lot more in the metaverse, and there have to be more people there when you go there for it to be worthwhile. And we're not anywhere near that yet. This has been a false dawn for the metaverse in the past 2 years. It doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. And we may get to the stage where there is this permanent, persistent other world there, which we can slip into and slip out of. But I don't see that happening in the next 5 years, no.
So relating to metaverse question, philosophical question, okay? Do you believe that people tend to like or to want to learn in the metaverse because of its immersive environment, or because of their avatar, because they are more free to be someone that normally they are not? For example, if a person that is very introspective in the metaverse, they tend to be more extrovert and talk with others, or would be a mix of those?
I think it depends on the person. I think it is absolutely the case that virtual reality, not the metaverse actually, but virtual reality provides a great immersive experience, as you say. It becomes a place where you can go and you can, if you're learning a language, you can, if it's done right, you can go into something that looks like a shop in France, for example. And if you're doing soft skills training, you can, and I've done this myself, it's actually very powerful. You can be in a room where you've got people who look different from you and who are explaining how they feel about things, and it's much more immersive, much more engaging, much more emotionally impactful than doing it in other ways. that's really virtual reality being used for training, and that's fine. It's not necessarily the metaverse, but it's virtual reality, and it's fine, and it works well. And that's why it's valuable to have it. So I think people, when they put a helmet on and they go into a virtual reality environment and they do that, yes, it works for them and they want to come back and they want to do it again. It is also true that if you are not you and you are playing a role, and that's true for role plays, by the way, as it is for putting on a helmet and doing it in another space virtually. If you're playing at somebody else, then it is liberating. There's no question about it. And that is valuable too. But I think of the two options you give, I think the first one, the immersive impact, has more influence on people than the second one of the role of the mask, the idea that when you're behind something else, you can be yourself. The reason I say that is that most training doesn't involve you being able to express yourself freely. It involves you having to do things. And that, I think, for most people, gets them back to reality, gets them back to where they feel they need to do or act in a certain way. So I think it's less about that, much more about the very powerful immersive experience that you can get when you put on a headset and you see a different world. And I've experienced this myself doing a number of virtual reality things, whether it's working at heights. You really feel looking down, you know you're standing on a floor, but you look down, you see you're high up with your virtual reality headset on. That feels scary. I've done a fighting in tunnels training course where you put a helmet on, and the first thing you do, because you're in a tunnel, is you crouch down, and you know there's somebody else out in the tunnel who is there to get you, and it's very scary, and your heartbeat goes up, even though you know you're standing on a conference floor and there's nothing around you that's going to hurt you. That immersive experience is what really provides the power for virtual reality and the metaverse as well.
Now, let's talk about the correlation between the training investments and business results. We have been talking about this, I believe, for many years, and so far I believe that we are making only baby steps during this process around the globe. How do you see this scenario in 2023? Are you seeing worldwide a growth of the maturity level of the companies and the L&D areas to really correlate the business results with the training investments, or we are still struggling to make this this proof of concept to the CEOs that normally when they need to reduce something, they reduce training budget. So how do you see that?
There are people who are doing really good work with aligning training activity with business objectives and being able to show that what you're doing is affecting the business. There's no question about it. So in the UK, for example, there's Guy Wilmshurst-Smith at Network Rail, who does a great job of making sure that the work that is done maintaining the tracks in the UK, the railway tracks in the UK, are seen to very clearly have an impact on the performance of the trains running on them. And he can show that through the use of data. It's a very clear correlation. There's people like Peter Manikariba, who is working at Novo Nordisk in Denmark, doing a very good job of aligning the activities they're doing with actual specific business objectives, but also using data to analyze how good their work has been to improve the learning initiatives themselves. And there are some startups who I won't mention, but there's some startup companies doing really good work enabling personalization and enabling people to get speed to competence much faster, typically in half the time of a normal training course, by using a good analysis of data. That speed to competence means that you've got somebody who can do their job in a shorter time, which is what the business wants. At the same time, we have still too much of a tendency to look at the needs of the business and not understand them properly. And it's almost as if learning and development is operating in a different building to the rest of the business, and it only hears a half-formed idea about what the business needs, and then it creates learning courses or materials to support it. The key correlation you need to have in a learning intervention program or any activity at all is not to show that you did this, it cost X, the return you got was Y, and therefore, the increased performance was Y, and therefore the return was Z. That can be done, but it's an expensive and time-consuming job to do it each time you do something in learning. What's much better is for the learning department to have an ongoing relationship with the business, understand what the business needs, and have a very agile mechanism for producing interventions and help to support the business. So if the business says, we're having trouble with something, the learning department understands the whole context for that and is able to suggest ways of helping that then have an impact on the business. And it does that iteratively. So it tries something, the business responds, we come back, we alter what we're doing so that we're working together to produce something to support the business. Now, if you're doing that, it's very difficult to create a return on investment study that results in a percentage showing, oh, well, you've had this many dollars of impact for that amount of dollars spent. But it is absolutely what the business wants, which is to know that I've got a problem and the people in learning and development can help me fix it. That is what the business needs from us. And so for me, the business, as you put it, creating a correlation between activity and impact is a very straightforward one to describe the answer to, which is you need to build a relationship between L&D and the business. A relationship. But the trouble with the relationship is that it's a complicated, difficult human thing to do, and it's a two-way thing. They want something from you, you're going to want something from them, you will be there to support them, they will be there to support you. That's what a relationship is. And it's unfortunately something which learning and development typically doesn't get involved with because it requires a sort of complexity of social interaction with the business that we're not used to. And so my advice to people wanting to get closer to the business is to go out, to meet people, to start conversations and to start understanding what they're doing before you start talking about learning. And that way you start building the relationship side of things. That it sounds a bit empty and a bit like a cloud in the sky, but actually it's the most difficult thing to do is to build an effective working relationship. Once you've got that, then you can get the data in and the analysis and everything else to support it and to show that what you're doing works. But you need to have the relationship first. Otherwise, everything else is probably too distant.
During the ATD in Orlando, the whole context of the Congress was talking about the high turnover that companies were facing, not only with the high potentials, but low potentials and everybody, and they presented us 3 challenges for the companies post-pandemic. The first one is to anticipate the results for the people that were hired in the companies, So as how companies could create a process, an onboarding process that would help the new employees to provide results faster, in order to reduce the amount of investment that companies needs to do to the onboarding for the new employees, as they were facing huge turnover numbers. The second was to maximize the results during the employee journey within the company. As they are staying just for a certain period of time. I believe that the average that they showed us in the survey was around 2 years. So how companies could maximize the results of these employees during these 2 years that they were within the company. And the last was to try to expand the employee journey life within the company, not only for 2 years, but maybe 3, 4, 5 years, and having them more time within the company. And this said, they talked about how L&D folks could help the companies during these three steps, and all of them, all of the steps converged to one key element, that was to have mapped the skills for each function. So what were the need of skills, hard and soft, for each function within the company, and with that provide a certain set of training and material to develop those in a faster way, taking in consideration the generations, taking in consideration the degree of education of each people, etc., etc. So, and when I heard that, I realized that we are not discovering America again, because this ISO 9001 talks about 3 decades for 30 years, 40 years. You need to have designed the function and the skills that you need to perform those functions. So it's not something new, and we are talking about this in 2022. What do you think, based on the congress that you host and the consultancy that you do, is the main difficulty for companies to really understand that they need this definition first? You need to have the function, you need to have the roles and responsibilities, and you need to have the skill set to perform that job really defined before you start creating a lot of training with no sense. So I see here in Brazil, companies is struggling to understand that, and I really don't understand why. Do you see this scenario in Europe as well, or around the globe where you have contacts?
And I think that I think you described something absolutely right. I think the way it's been portrayed in the US at the conference you're at is particularly acute in the US and in developed economies in Europe, where we have an aging population. And we're suddenly in this position where you've got people we have a shrinking workforce as a percentage of the population. And therefore, there's a tight labor market, and employers need to get the most out of people for as long as possible while they are employed. It's a very different position to, I think, anything we've had in the past. It's very different in Brazil, where, as you said, you've got a very much younger population. So with that background, it's really important to get the most out of the people who work in your organization. And what you're describing is skills-based talent management, which was the third choice worldwide on the survey coming up from last year. So it's something the whole world recognizes as important. There are two things that I would say are an issue with this. Firstly, it's easy to talk about, but difficult to do. And I was doing this 15 years ago in the mid-2000s. It was much more difficult to do it then. It's still difficult now. The reason it's difficult to do is that it involves understanding people's skills. And you can do that in a number of ways. One way is to use AI in some way to understand from their activity what they're good at. But the other way is to ask them to find out by self-assessment or doing a job or whatever that they have a particular skill level. Okay, so you can do that a number of ways, but it still takes time and effort to do it. Having said that, I know a number of companies, Deutsche Post, DHL, for example, have done a fabulous job of using exactly this approach to reduce their churn rate of their staff, to keep people longer, and to increase the amount of the percentage of people who are recruited internally for jobs. It used to be 50-50. They've moved it up to 60-something% being recruited internally. They want to keep moving it up so that the people who they recruit come in with the understanding of the business, they know the culture of the business, and very importantly, it's much cheaper to recruit people internally than it is to go out and find them externally. So it has worked for them. But my concern, this is the second point, my concern about using skills-based talent management effectively is that there has been a lot of focus on it in the last 2 or 3 years, as you say. And my concern is that that is a focus that takes us away from other things. It's not just that we need skills from people, we need other things as well. We need attitude and we need knowledge. We also need a sort of cultural understanding. And those things are not part of a skills taxonomy. I'm a great believer in skills frameworks and taxonomies, but it's always dangerous when we focus so much on one thing, we run the risk of forgetting the other things that are important as well. So I think, to answer your question, yes, there is a real desire for this stuff around the world. Is it the whole answer to the question? No, it isn't. And is it easy to do it? It certainly isn't. So I think everyone has to perhaps reorganize their expectations a little bit. We're not going to be able to change the world overnight with this, but if we get it right, yes, it can certainly have a good effect on the business.
Thank you very much, Don. Well, we are reaching out our time here, and normally we finalize our interview with 3 quick questions. Okay, so so the first one, if you could share with us a positive moment, the most positive moment in your career.
Most positive moment in my career was when I was writing freelance for a newspaper in Istanbul. I was teaching as well, but I was writing freelance for them, and this was in 1990, possibly 1989. And as well as teaching, I was doing this side job of writing, and I went and I had something accepted, and it was printed in the newspaper, and I went and collected my money. And it was an extraordinary moment that I had something which had come from my head, from nowhere, had been created and was valuable. It was valuable enough to be printed. It was valuable enough for someone to give me some money for it. And I took that I think it was a 20,000 lira note. I went down to the harbour. I bought some baklava. I sat down. I ate the baklava. I watched the ships. I watched Istanbul. And it was a wonderful moment when I realised that if you write and you work hard at making it valuable for people, that can be reciprocated and you can create something that people value from nothing. That was a great moment.
Second question, what was your biggest learning moment? The moment that something you did that was, terrible. We say learning. Yeah, you're a failure. You're a learning moment. Yeah.
Well, there are lots to choose from. Because you don't do anything without failing. But you know what? I'm not going to choose one. I'm going to choose a habit which I've had, which other people would look at and say, that looks like failure. But for me, I'd say, no, it's learning. There are a series of times when I have tried something, I've been quite sure this is a great idea. This is going to work. So I started a magazine. I started a course. I started a podcast. I started a series of things, all of which failed. And if you look at them, just each one by itself, you could say, what a waste of time and money that was. And it's not just once, as I say. This happened several times. But I'd say, no, it's not a failure, because I actually, when I created a magazine for Istanbul, I wrote it, I created it, and it failed. It failed for very good reasons that I can now identify, and I don't do those again. The podcast was really good, but it didn't have the mechanism for getting money off people. And so it failed. There are other reasons, other things I've done and failed, but on each step, on each time I've done that, absolutely I've learned from it, and I've tried to apply that in the future as well. And so it's a small failure. I think the trick is to accept you're going to fail and to remember that when you start something, and to try to make it, what you're doing, not so big that if it fails, it's catastrophic. So it's much better to have, as I've had in my life, lots of small failures than one catastrophic failure. But having said that, even one catastrophic failure, if anybody's listening to this, and quite serious, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, there is something which is going to go awfully, awfully wrong, my feeling is almost certainly it is not quite as big as you think. And if it goes wrong and you get through it, in the future, you will look back and you will say, well, that was bad, but I learned from it and I'm now better. So I think all failure actually is good.
And to conclude, last question, how do you define your purpose in life as well as your purpose as a professional?
Well, they're the same thing for me. I don't mean I take my work as my purpose in life, but my definition of what makes doing it right is the same. And for both of them, it is something rather boring, which is to do my duty. I have been lucky enough to be born and brought up in good circumstances in a rich country, and I feel that means I have a duty to help others be successful, be secure in life. So for me, in my family life, which is the most important thing to me, it's always been a duty to make sure that I, with my wife, create a home that is a good place and that we play our role in our society locally. And the same is true in my professional life, to do my duty to my fellow professionals, to support them in their growth, to try to, as you said right at the beginning, build places where we can have good, useful conversations. For me, that is a duty that I feel very strongly. And I hope that I've been successful at least some of the way in my personal life and in my professional life in fulfilling my duty.
Thank you very much, Donald. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us, for sharing your knowledge. For us, it's a great honor to have you in our podcast here. And I hope that we keep in touch. And we, for sure, I will share with you offline some insights that we have during our conversations that I believe will be useful for the L&D folks. And once again, thank you for sharing your time with us and your knowledge. Okay.
It's been a real pleasure to be here. If there's one thing we can all do to make the world a better place, it's to have more conversations, particularly between different people in different countries. Thank you for having the conversation in English, and thank you to everyone who's listened for listening in English. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much for listening to us. This is a special episode of Simplify L&D for the Brazilian and Portuguese folks. We'll see this episode tomorrow in English, but also with the legend in Portuguese. And for everybody else, it will be in Spotify, Deezer, and all the apps for podcasts that you have available. Simplify L&D is the podcast that collaborates to your involvement as professional as well as human being. Wishing to see you all in our next episode. Keep safe. God bless you. Digital regards. Bye-bye.